As cool as it would be to see a gladiator free-for-all or to take MMA back to the olden days, they have weight classes in combat sports for a reason. Of course, we've seen the little guy come out on top quite a few times, especially when the skill levels are different, but being bigger has its advantages. You can carry more muscle, you can use your weight against your opponent, or maybe you can just hit harder. Almost everyone cuts weight in the UFC to a certain extent, but there's certainly also been those fighters over the years who have cut more weight than anyone else in their division, and because they've been able to make the weight limits, it's given them a big advantage. I'm Balian from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 biggest weight class bullies in the UFC. Okay, a quick disclaimer, obviously. So first of all, what the heck is a weight bully? Well, honestly, it's not actually a great term to use when describing anyone, but what we mean here in this case is that people that actually had an advantage by cutting a lot of weight. Now, I know immediately everyone thinks Rumble Johnson, but the argument here is that he was actually a better KO artist when he wasn't cutting weight and fought at 205. At 170, he had a few wins, but he also had plenty of losses, so it's not really fair to say he was a weight bully. Just a guy, actually, if anything, had to go up weight classes to be truly effective. Cody Stamann, for example, as well, hit the scale at 135 and has weighed in at 159 on fight night, but he's also lost in plenty of those fights, so everyone on this list has to have at least been consistently winning whilst cutting the weight. So number 10, Gleison Tibau. This Brazilian lightweight spent 12 years in the UFC where he got plenty of wins, missed weight a bunch of times, and also got caught doing some form of EPO. But he's also absolutely notorious for cutting a ridiculous amount of weight before his bouts and then swelling up like a water balloon by fight night. Especially before USADA arrived, started testing everyone, but also more importantly, banned the use of IVs to rehydrate. Now, why is that important? Well, using an IV also means you can essentially cut that much extra weight. And it certainly makes it a lot easier to rehydrate than sipping cups of Pedialyte and coconut water, as well as getting your body back essential minerals that it needs. Let's look at his UFC 164 bout against Jamie Varner, for example, where he was able to cut a ridiculous amount of weight.
How do you cut to 155? You're such a big guy. What's your secret? How do you do that?
I mean, lose 30 pounds the fight.
Wow. How much do you weigh right now?
180.
Joe Rogan described his neck as an oak tree that night, and he smothered Jamie for much of the fight. But this was something he did in pretty much every UFC fight he had. He outsized multiple opponents and often picked them up and just slammed them into the canvas. He scored 10 takedowns in one fight. In fact, he's tied second for the most takedowns in UFC history at 84 completed, of course helped by his size advantage. On the reverse end at UFC 148, he made history as being the only guy ever Khabib couldn't take down in the Eagles' closest fight, and he was huge during that one as well. But it's also no secret that after USADA came into the UFC and banned IVs and everything else, he also never won a fight in the promotion again. Number 9, Cris Cyborg. Justino has made a career out of absolutely annihilating all of her competition with brutal flurries of punches, the way Agent Smith was just trying to punch the red pill out of Neo. I mean, obviously she's got world-class Muay Thai, but you know, she's also pretty goddamn big. She's 5'8" and fights at featherweight. Okay, that's bigger than Jose Aldo, Chad Mendes, obviously Alexander Volkanovski, but she's also got a lot of muscle, and quite famously, she cuts a hell of a lot of weight to make the 145-pound limit. She apparently walks around at 170 pounds, but let's take a look at her fight against Charmaine Tweet back in 2015. She weighed in on Thursday at 145 pounds, and by Sunday, she was up to 175 pounds. And she absolutely uses her size against her opponents, often carrying far more muscle than them and able to walk them down and unload powerful strikes, usually far more impactful than anything her opponent can muster. How much of that is in her technique? Well, a lot, of course, we've already mentioned that, but of course also because of her size. I do have to point out that in 2011 she tested positive for anabolic steroids after her fight, so yeah, she looked pretty jacked for that one. Number 8, Thiago Alves. Well, here's another gentleman who seems far too stacked for his division. Hell, this guy was far too stacked for even the Sunday special at Cracker Barrel. Not only was Thiago Alves a Muay Thai Miley Cyrus wrecking ball, he carried a lot of weight for the 170-pound division and used that to go on a 5-fight knockout streak, laying waste to all of the UFC welterweights, basically, yeah, pretty much. He hit incredibly hard and was a complete tank in the division, outpowering pretty much everyone he was locked in the cage with and stuffing takedowns on all the wrestlers. He got himself on that Dolce diet and even famously ballooned up to 197.6 pounds just 3 hours after a weigh-in. Yeah, that's like only a few pounds away from light heavyweight, isn't it? 27 pounds in 3 hours? What even is the Dolce diet? Horse meat marinated in Costa's secret juice? Either way, his KO streak led him to a fight with Matt Hughes right after he'd lost to GSP for the belt. And not only did Thiago weigh in over the limit at 174 pounds, God knows what he was fight night, but he flying kneed the fudge cake out of his face in a KO of the night win. He'd already tested positive for banned substances at that point as well, and his UFC record after USADA came into the picture was just 2-6. But to be fair, he had been fighting a long time at that point as well. He even tried to go to lightweight and fight Jim Miller and missed by 6.5 pounds, but because Miller is a gangster, he still beat him anyway. Skill levels, you see, you know what I mean? Number 7. Paulo Costa.
The secret juice.
There aren't many people that have been bigger at middleweight than Paulo Costa, I'm afraid. I mean, it must take some serious discipline, dieting and weight cutting for him to step on the scales and hit 185. And technically, he's never actually missed weight. Now, he definitely had that whole incident with Marvin Vettori where they agreed to fight at a catch weight of 195, but he showed up to fight week 211 pounds, so they made it a 205 fight instead. I mean, sure, that was crazy, but still not as crazy as him being able to make 185, if you ask me. Throughout his UFC career, he has massively outsized many of his opponents, and that's basically just let him walk them down without any problems at all, just throwing bombs. He was bigger than McClellan in his debut, bigger than Bambose, obviously much bigger than Johnny Hendricks, and even Uriah Hall as well. All guys he just walked down and threw leather at until he finished them. The Eraser for sure is the right nickname. Even against Yoel Romero, Mark Raimondi reported that Costa weighed 213.8 pounds on fight night. That's almost 30 pounds heavier than the day before, and almost at the 15% limit that CSAC recommends before you move up a weight class. Costa's size and frame for the weight class has certainly helped with his non-stop forward pressure brawling style, and that's a style that most people often don't have a lot of success with, but Costa does. Number 6, Khabib and Islam. Probably going to get some hate for this entry, not going to lie. The amount I read on forums while researching this video with people defending Khabib and his massive weight cuts and weight gain was quite a lot. I mean, the fact of the matter is, though, he does cut a lot of weight to get down to 155. Daniel Cormier actually talked about this recently before 285.
I would get down from 260 sometimes.
That's what I'm
to make
saying. Like, Rampage was 265.
I almost died.
That's way better.
All the guys from AK, me and Khabib, we're just weight bullies, losing 50 pounds. White dude smaller than us.
What did DC mean by this? Well, Khabib definitely put on a lot of weight outside of fight camps, up to 190 pounds. But honestly, based on what you hear from a lot of fighters, that's not unheard of. Guys like Michael Chandler or Dustin Poirier also cut a lot of weight to get down to 155. But the difference, I guess, with Khabib is his grappling style. I mean, you can't really argue that cutting a massive amount of weight and putting it on again on fight night isn't going to help when grappling and wearing on people, right? And he has had trouble cutting the weight. At UFC 160, he missed weight and decided not to cut any further and instead gave up some of his fight purse. That also happens to be the same night where he set the record for most takedowns in a single bout. Not saying it's a coincidence, but that is what actually happened. At 209, the fight with Tony was cancelled as well because the weight cut went wrong for Khabib. When it comes to having weight classes, a lot of the reason for them is because of grapplers. And we do also see these same problems with Islam cutting a similar amount of weight and also enacting a similar game plan. We couldn't leave this one out. It's a pretty polarizing topic in the community, and I know you'll all have your own opinion on whether he is or isn't a weight bully, but I'll leave that up to you to discuss in the comments because I know you want to. Number 5, Khamzat Chimaev. As if the Chechen Wolf wasn't already scary enough, what's even more alarming is that this man can make 170 pounds, or well, at least he has done. And when he has done, he's been 6'2" and is a lot bigger than your average welterweight. Not to mention, the guy's able to still carry a lot of muscle at that weight class. How much does he cut to get himself down to welterweight? Well, a lot. I mean, we know after his stint with COVID, he got as high as 205 pounds, but he was trying to recover. At UFC 267 against the Leech, he initially weighed in over the limit, came back after 45 minutes and weighed 166. He was trying to pull a DC with the towel though, but it was obviously a difficult weight cut. He had the height, reach and size advantage over the Leech that night and wasted no time dragging him to the mat and putting all of his weight on him once he got there. And that's kind of been the game plan for pretty much all of his fights. I mean, it's not like that worked against Gilbert Burns, but again, he did also massively outsize him in that one. After UFC 279, where he missed by 7.5 pounds, it was unclear if we'd see him at welterweight again. Dana said he was suffering from cramp. Khamzat's coach claimed that it was his own choice to stop the weight cut, and Khamzat himself blamed Darren Till. Either way though, he didn't seem too upset by it. If we continue to see Boars at 170, I have no doubt he'll be a lot bigger and stronger than almost everyone he faces.
He'll fight a middleweight.
Number 4, Conor McGregor. Looking back at pictures of Conor from 2015, he honestly looks like almost a different person. I mean, there's been some guys that have put on weight throughout their careers and moved up divisions, but I don't think anyone more apparent than Conor. Even in 2012, when he won the Cage Warriors lightweight championship, he was nowhere near as big as he was when he moved up in the UFC, and that slimmer frame complemented his style quite well. But Conor being able to make 145 at 5'9" with a 74-inch reach gave him a big advantage when it came to striking, especially as a counter striker and with that long left hand of his. Combined with his ability to manage distance and his footwork, he was able to keep opponents on the edge of his reach and, as Russell Crowe once said, unleash hell. And it's no secret that he was seriously draining himself to make the featherweight division. Take a look at any of his weigh-in footage or pictures of him and you'll see just how much he was cutting, and he certainly hits a lot harder than your average featherweight, as noted by Joe Rogan. It shocks you. How much of that should be accredited to his technique and speed though? Well, obviously a lot, but he certainly took full advantage of being able to make 145.
I'm 5'6".
You're 5'4" at least. You should stand up because we can barely see you on the screen.
Number 3, Alex Pereira. Ever since Poatan Pereira arrived in the UFC, pretty much everyone has been talking about just how big this guy is.
Did you see the size of the fella? Dude's just giant. He's an absolute giant. Just his facial features are bigger. His feet and hands and forearms are massive. I'm just thinking, like, who let this guy in?
There's been tall middleweights, guys like Luke Rockhold, but Alex is bigger than even him, measuring 6'4" tall. Now this is technically the same size as Israel Adesanya, but put those two next to each other on fight night and tell me they are the same size, because they are just not. In fact, Alex walks around outside of camp as high as 105 kilograms, which is about 232 pounds. That was about 3 months before UFC 281. There have been heavyweights who fight at that weight, who don't cut weight, okay? That's about as much as Stipe Miocic weighs. In fact, it's more than Stipe weighed when he fought DC the second time. Imagine if Stipe could cut to middleweight. That is insane. At 281, he hit championship weight, and then just 24 hours later, he was already back up to 211 pounds on fight night. Obviously, his long frame and body type mixed with his kickboxing style gives him an advantage at middleweight, and it's no secret he has incredible knockout power, which is most likely helped by the extra weight he's able to carry in fight night. Some people have suggested that the weight cut at 287 was perhaps too much and it factored into the finish, but I don't think we can take anything away from Adesanya that night. Number 2, Johnny Hendricks. When USADA came along and, for the good of the sport, implemented a ton of changes to help prevent doping and cheating, lots of fighters got caught doing things they shouldn't and were punished. Johnny Hendricks was not one of these people, but as I mentioned at the start of the video, USADA also banned the use of IVs as a means of rehydration. And this just made it impossible for some people to continue cutting weight, like Johnny Hendricks.
I'm a bigger welterweight. I walk around at 210. The IV always brought me back. You know, it helped me get back to life. It helped me get back to where I didn't feel like I cut weight. Once USADA came into the play, I'd had to start walking around like 190 at best.
Cutting down from 210 to 170 is a lot of weight, 40 pounds in fact. I know a lot of people think his diet was certainly a part of that, but he really had a lot of problems making 170. At UFC 192, his fight with Woodley was cancelled because of an intestinal blockage and kidney stone. He then also missed weight 4 times, and all of this happened after the IV ban.
All the minerals that you're pulling from your body, you need those back in your muscles, and with them, my body was able to recover after that hard weight cut.
And while at 170, Johnny had a ton of KO power and had a wrestling game that benefited him from being a bigger guy, and he would rehydrate to way above the weight class limit.
Let's see, I fought on Saturday. On Sunday night, I got home, I was 219.
I know Johnny is trying to defend IVs here, but to me, it just sounds like they encourage extreme weight cuts, which he was making at that weight class. Number 1, Deiveson Figueiredo. I think most people remember some of the pictures of Deiveson's skeleton that have come out during some of his fight week weight cuts. Now, usually outside of camp, he's around 152 pounds, which is still a hell of a lot of weight to cut down from, 27 pounds worth. But it is also said, like before his fight with Jussier Formiga, he was as high as 165, which led to a 40-pound weight cut. Actually, he lost that one, which doesn't really help our case for him being on this list, but for the 125 division, he carries an insane amount of power and physicality, which has led him to 7 finishes inside the octagon. You can't forget that the first time he fought for a UFC title, he actually missed weight and wasn't even eligible to win the belt, and all of his subsequent weight cuts have had him essentially stating that he intends to move up to 135 pounds because he doesn't want to put his body through that weight cut. In fact, some people have run the numbers and he seems to cut 18% of his body weight, which is basically like cutting off your own leg, and then reattaching it on fight night, where he usually weighs about 143 pounds. In fact, at UFC 270, he put on 19 pounds on fight night, which is over the amount CSAC allows before they recommend you move up a weight class. Cutting weight as a flyweight is not the same as being a heavyweight, which makes it that much harder. After his last loss to Brandon in his post-fight interview, he himself said he'll be moving up a weight class, so at least he's taking the doctor's advice.
Well, I see severe dehydration here, multiple vitamin deficiencies, anemia.
Have you eaten anything today?
No.